So we'll just start at the front of the brain here. So, all right, guys. So what is the name of this sulcus that's wiggling back and forth here in the front? Right, and it ends at this sulcus or fissure that's just dorsal to it, or just caudal, I guess. Cruciate fissure. And if we go along the side right here, we jump back one gyrus to this, or jump back over the gyrus to this sulcus. Sulcus. Which goes to this little dip in the brain right here. Insula. Right. And then we've got this fissure that runs along the side of the brain here. Rhinal fissure. Look at you guys. You're ready for this. If we can take it as a group, it'll be fine. Okay. Yeah. All right. So what is this gyrus right here?
Lateral olfactory gyrus.
Right, and this little white stripe going along the side right here?
Lateral olfactory stria.
Okay, and what is this cranial nerve?
Olfactory bulb.
Right, and then this cranial nerve?
Optic nerve.
Which then crosses at the?
Optic chiasm.
And then is called the?
Optic tract.
Correct, all right. And so this gyrus right here on both sides?
Hippocampal gyrus.
And the nucleus just under the cortex at the tip of that gyrus?
Amygdala.
All right. And the dark flappy structure hanging off right here?
Infundibula.
Excellent. Oh, right, yeah. This specific area right up here.
Anterior perforated substance.
All right, and so if we had a pin that was going through right here, and we said name the space inside the brain that this pin is going through. And what is the tissue that's surrounding this pin?
Median eminence.
All right. And this structure right here that's just behind that.
Mammillary bodies.
And then these flappy fettuccine noodle things.
Ocular motor nerves.
And
Which encephalon are those attached to?
they are attached to the cerebral peduncles. Mesencephalon. So this is the mesencephalon here. And what is the space outside the brain between the peduncles?
Interpedunculaire cistern.
Right. And then this guy right here, pons. And there are fibers that are going right across here. And then we've got these nerves right here.
Abducens.
And then we've got these fibers running along right here. Right. And then this last portion right here. Medulla. Right. And so this is the, what encephalon is this?
Myencephalon.
Right. So if we ask you what encephalon the abducens are on, then that's the myelencephalon, right? And then this is the, then when we add the pons and this guy, this is which encephalon? Metencephalon. Because it goes in alphabetical order. So you have my, then met, and then the cerebral peduncles are in the?
Mesencephalon.
Right. And then the mammillary bodies are in which encephalon? Right. And this space outside the brain right here. And the space outside the brain right here.
Cisterna magna.
And then the tip of this V shape right here.
Obex.
Right, that's the obex there. And if we were going inside the brain, this space inside the brain in there.
Fourth ventral.
Right. And then here, these top guys.
Superior colliculus.
And these bottom guys.
Inferior colliculus.
Correct. All right, did we miss anything on the?
What's the
brachial?
Oh yeah, okay, so name these fibers right along here.
Brachius pontus.
And there is a cranial nerve that's normally coming off right here. Trigeminal. We're just going to ignore the trochlear.
Are we not intestinal?
What's that?
We're not intestinal?
On the trochlear, it gets ripped off a lot of times, and so I just figured it's easier if we don't worry about it.
Does the trigeminal nerve come from the
It comes from the metencephalon, because it's coming off the side where this, like, kind of on the pons right there.
And then what about the vermis?
Oh yeah, and so then the central part of the cerebellum right here, vermis.
What's the big sulcus up there? Like the one that divides your building? What's that called again?
Oh, this is the longitudinal fissure. I don't think that's on you guys' list, but it's fun to know.
Yeah.
Yes.
And could you also show the chloride plexus on
I wouldn't do the choroid plexus on this. I do it on a sagittal or a coronal cut.
It like one of the.
Yeah, it's on the list
I
there.
didn't think we had talked about it.
It's inside the ventricles, so I feel like it's kind of hard. Like there might be some sticking out of the fourth ventricle, but otherwise it's, yeah.
You say you're not in the test on the
Yeah, not on the trochlear.
Oh, where's the
Trigeminal comes off of right here. So it's been removed on this brain, but it's normally that big root that's coming off of right here.
So coming out from
Yes,
so that will be the back.
correct.
And the abducens comes from the masculine.
The abducens comes off the very front of the medulla, so it's myelencephalon. Yes. Obex with a B as in boy. Yeah. Spelling doesn't count though, as long as I know what you're trying to write. Don't just start writing down random letters because I won't know what that is. F, D, H, Q, that's not going to work. All right. Sagittal. Sagittal, you guys ready? Okay. Okay, so this gyrus running along above the corpus callosum, and the sulcus just above it, and the sulcus just below it, and then just below that these fibers are right in the very back of the corpus callosum, and the curve of the corpus callosum, and the very front part of the corpus callosum. And then we've got this general area down below the front of the corpus callosum. Septum. If we had a membrane that was covering the lateral ventricle, what would that be? Right. Since we don't, we can see this nucleus in here, which is the... And then we've got... What is this guy right here? Correct. And if we could see a white dot right here... Correct. And these fibers running down along this way in front of the thalamus? Fornix. This big old round circle right here?
Thalamus.
And if we had a pin through the center of the thalamus asking about the fibers connecting both sides?
Media.
And then there's this little wart, like this little bump on the back of the thalamus right here? Habenula.
The what?
Habenula. And then just caudal to the thalamus, there's a gland or a body.
Pineal gland.
There we go. And this top part right here is the, it could be the tectum if we were talking about a specific nucleus.
Superior colliculus.
And if we asked that on the practicum, either tectum or superior colliculus would be appropriate for naming this right here. There's a white stripe that's going through along right here. Lamina quadrigemina. The space inside the brain just below the tectum.
Cerebral aqueduct.
Right. And then the space below the cerebral aqueduct.
Tegmentum.
Tegmentum. And then this space inside the brain right here.
Fourth ventricle.
Fourth ventricle. And then this nucleus right here that's part of the encephalon with the cerebellum.
Pons.
Pons. And then this would be the last one right here is the medulla.
About the interior medullary. Yeah.
Oh yeah, so if you can see a flap right here, this flappy guy right there, that's the anterior medullary velum. Is there anything else on our list here from the sagittals?
On the bottom, you said the pons and the...
Yeah, this is the medulla right here, and this is the pons right here.
Where's the fornix?
Where's the what?
Fornix.
Fornix is this guy that's running along. It's the white fibers that make up the bottom part of the lateral ventricles. So you got the white fibers of the corpus callosum making up the top of the lateral ventricle. You got the caudate making up the lateral wall of the lateral ventricle, and you got the fornix making up the floor of the lateral ventricle. All right, should we do, wait, other question? This whole thing right here is the lateral. Oh. Yeah.
Oh boy.
It's so big and blurry. Any other questions on this? The habenula is on the very back part of this thalamus right here. It's sort of a bump that's like right there. So if you saw a pin towards the very back end of the thalamus and it said name this specific nucleus, just that's what I would be aware of as being the habenula. Yes. The septum pellucidum. It's the membrane that's separating the two sides of the lateral ventricles from each other. Yes.
Is like the black part just above the thalamus? That the
Yeah. Good question right there. Yes, this black stuff right here, this is choroid plexus here. So if you have a question asking you, what is this dark substance sitting inside the ventricle or something like that, that's when you'd want to answer choroid plexus.
And that converts the blood into
Cerebral spinal. Correct. Fornix is this guy right here. It's the white fibers that are going along right there. Yes. There's a total of like 60 or 70 questions on the practicum. Yeah, basically, because it'll be worth a total of 30 points. So we do a conversion to turning into an adjusted score of out of 30. But that way, I figure the more questions, the better. So that way, if there's something you just totally don't know, a specific cut, it's not going to seriously hurt you.
So like everything in the coronal.
Yes. Question? Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Did you say anything about like in the center of the thalamus?
Yes.
What is that?
The massa intermedia. Massa intermedia. Yes.
So they would differentiate between the mass intermediate and then just the thalamus.
I would ask something like name the fibers that are connecting the two sides, something like that.
Okay, so it would be kind of, it would be
Like-
explained through like a question.
So it'd be something asking the fibers as opposed to asking the nucleus. So the massa intermedia are fibers that are connecting both sides of the thalamus. If I'm asking like a nucleus type thing, then it could be the lateral geniculate nucleus, it could be the habenula. I don't think we'd ask a question that's actually asking the thalamus, at least not on sheep brain. I don't know if we do that with the human brain, but the sheep brain, the thalamus, I feel like is way too easy. Just like I'm not inclined to ask for the medulla because I feel like that's way too easy. Like I want you guys to have a little bit of a challenge.
It's because it wasn't a good joke. And I
Yes.
myself.
What does the what? Guys, quiet down, quiet down. The mammillothalamic tract are fibers that are going from the mammillary bodies up to the thalamus. So if any fiber tract like that is normally named where it's projecting from and where it's going to. Any other questions on the sagittal? Yes. Tegmentum is everything below the cerebral aqueduct. So I like to think of it as like you're going spelunking, you're in the cerebral aqueduct here. And like when you're looking at stalactites, they come from the ceiling, stalagmites come from the ground. So the tectum, C for ceiling, tegmentum, G for ground. So the general area of anything that's below the cerebral aqueduct is known as the tegmentum. Any other questions? Should we go on to coronals? One more question. Mammillothalamic tract? Yes. Correct. We only see those in the coronal cuts. Okay, so coronal cuts. Dope. So here, from this very first cut, we're just going to go through what we can see with each one of these. What are these? Ew, there's a hair on my brain. Whose hair is this? You can have it back. I just pull my hair out, stick it in the brain jar. Okay, so what are these white fibers right here?
Corpus callosum.
All right, what is this gyrus just above the corpus callosum?
Cingulate gyrus.
And this space inside the brain right here? And this membrane right here separating the lateral ventricle. All right, and what is this nucleus right here? And this right here in the center, this tissue, which is continuous with the... Correct. And on... Yes. Anterior perforated substance. So This is the septum right here in the center. You can see kind of a white line going around that's separating the caudate from the septum. And you can see this tissue is continuous going around here with that anterior perforated substance, which is that part that's in the front of the optic
The
chiasm.
septum is below the septum pellucidum.
Yes, the septum pellucidum is the membrane. That's this thing right here. And if you follow this down, then now you've got this tissue of the septum where there's this white line right here that's separating the caudate from the septum. Question? There's nothing I can really ask about that. How thick is it up here versus down there? There's not really a question about that. Yes?
How would we know that the septum is connecting to the perforated septum?
You can see it right here. You can see that. I'm not going to ask you what is this continuous with, probably. But you can see it right here that this is continuous with it. Gray matter.
Is it kind of obvious because the septum is only in the front?
So here is the septum. It's this area right here that's below that front of the corpus callosum. And you can't, you can kind of tell on there, but I think on here it becomes really clear where you can see this tissue right here. There is, so you got a white line that's separating the caudates from the septum. There is no white line separating the septum from the anterior perforated substance. You can see clearly, like it just keeps following along right there. You've got a white line that's outlining the caudate all the way here. You have no white line splitting the anterior perforated substance from the septum.
Well, we need to know what the name of that white line is.
No, it's just white fibers that are separating things. We never learned that. Okay, moving on to the next cut. All right, so we've gone a little farther back. So again, what do we call these white fibers up here? And the gyrus just above that? And the space inside the brain below the corpus callosum? Lateral ventricles. Now we've got these white fibers that are running right here.
Internal capsule.
Right, and so just medial to those white fibers is the caudate, and then just lateral to those white fibers on this side, putamen, or the putamen. If I was owning a neuroscience hotel, I would call it the putamen. So then we've still got that membrane here that's separating the two ventricles.
Septum pellucidum.
And then we've got this part right here. You can see it separates from the caudate, this septum, right. And then over here, this white fiber bundle on this side of the putamen.
External capsule.
And then this other white fiber bundle here.
Extreme capsule.
And then we've got this triangle shape right here. Claustrum. Okay. If we turn this over now, we're on the other side. We can see that the white fibers now of this internal capsule kind of go down and they split out right here. This nucleus right here. Globus pallidus. And this guy now up here. Caudate. And so then this guy, which is a half moon shape over here. Putamen. This ventricle right here. Lateral ventricle. And what's the fibers above it? Aren't we getting sick of corpus callosum? And I love my corpus callosum. All right, so then these fibers again on this side of the putamen. External capsule. And the other one's over here. Extreme. And then this triangle right here. Claustrum again. And now the septum is this large piece right here, if you're wondering. We do see the septum. I don't know if it's still intact right here, but the septum pellucidum runs all the way back, separating the lateral ventricles from each other. There's no point where the lateral ventricles have no septum pellucidum between them. They always have that membrane separating them, which is what makes them ventricle 1 and 2. All right, so let's move a little further back. Should we look at this one? This is pretty much the same thing we were looking at, where we can see the globus pallidus right here. Caudate up there, putamen over here. So let's move a little further back. This one's got some optic chiasm hanging out of the bottom here. Can we see anything different? Not really. Let's turn it over. We'll look at the other side. All right, so from this side now, this gross black stuff hanging out inside here. Right, and these fibers right up here.
Corpus callosum.
And these fibers right here. Fornix, right. And then, let's see, so now what is this nucleus over here to the side? Caudate, right. And we can make out this teardrop shape over here on the side. Amygdala, right. So we no longer see the claustrum here. We don't see, in fact, you can see we've moved past that optic chiasm. So we should be out of basal ganglia country at this point here. We're moving into the area of the thalamus. We especially know that because we can see the third ventricle here. So we know that we're not going to be seeing claustrum or anything like that. That's how you know you're going to be probably seeing the amygdala over there.
So if you see the amygdala, you won't see claustrum.
Right.
The third ventricle is what looks in there?
Yeah, the third ventricle. Once you start getting to the third ventricle, then you know you're moving into where you're at the thalamus. You're no longer in basal ganglia where you're going to see the putamen of the globus pallidus. You keep seeing the caudate because the caudate's got this really long tail. It keeps going back along that lateral wall of the lateral ventricle. But other than the caudate, which is this guy up here, we don't really see any other parts of the basal ganglia.
So the third ventricle is beneath the fornix.
Third ventricle is, yes, beneath the fornix. So yeah, the fornix is separating the lateral ventricles from the third ventricle.
Can you see the columns of the fornix?
Not yet. All right, so from this cut, we can kind of see this dot pattern where you've got a dot up here and a dot down here. So you guys are going to just kind of have to use your imagination a little bit here. But what are the dots that, if we're putting a pin here and there's dots up here and there's dots down here, what are the dots that would be just dorsal of the pin, so the higher ones here? Right, and the ones that are just below that? Cool, yeah. So you've got the fornix that basically is up here. It curves around the thalamus, and we see these columns of the fornix coming down right here. Yeah, so that's the fornix. This nucleus up here, caudate. And this guy right here with this teardrop shape, amygdala. And these fibers running here at the top of the lateral ventricle, corpus callosum. And this gyrus just above the corpus callosum. All right, I think that's all we can see here. Let's move a little further back. So now with this guy, we can see this definitely is no longer the fornix up here. What would this be? Hippocampus. And then this part down here? Also hippocampus. All right.
So how do you know when you no longer see it?
So when you're no longer seeing the fornix? Fornix looks like this, where it's white fibers. When we get to the hippocampus, now we've got gray matter up here. And if you're able to look at it just right, there's a swirl in it, which if I were to open a neuroscience themed amusement park, I would name my roller coaster the hippocampus and would totally have loop-de-loops on it. But so you've got that. So if you can see hippocampus here at the top, that means you've also got hippocampus at the bottom. You're no longer at the amygdala. So even if it seems like it's kind of a teardrop shape, there's kind of, there tend to be a curl swooping in at the bottom here. And that's how you know you're at the hippocampus, no longer at the amygdala. Because remember, with it, it's like you've got this C shape. Amygdala is right at the tip. And then you got hippocampus here at the top, as well as at the bottom. If you can see these fibers right here that are connecting kind of between that top and bottom part of the hippocampus, what do we call those fibers there? Fimbria, right. So that's like the webbing of my hand, connecting the top and bottom of the hippocampus. These fibers that are running along the side of the thalamus right here, optic tract, right. You could also call them optic fibers. No, there's just two names for the same thing. You can't call them the optic nerve, though, because the nerve is before we get to the chiasm.
Can you point to the fimbria one more time? Yeah,
the fimbria on this piece are these fibers that we can see up here. They would basically, they should be at both the top and the bottom if you can see the whole thing. Can't really on this cut, we can just see a little bit of them right there.
So the hippocampus goes down on both sides.
Yeah, so the hippocampus is shaped basically like this in the brain. So you got this part that's medial and these guys stick out laterally. Maybe we can see more on one of these. Here's another. So this is another one where you can see hippocampus right here because we've got these curls that are happening in here, where you kind of have that similar shape, but there's some kind of white lines that are going through parts of this, and that's how you know you're at hippocampus here. But you can still see the fornix up here, so it's before it's become full hippocampus at the top. You can see the caudate nucleus up here at that lateral wall of the lateral ventricle still. Yes. Not yet. So the fibers of the optic tract will move up until they get to the top right here, and that's when they're at the LGN. Right now you can see the optic tract fibers more like down here, so we know that it hasn't moved that far yet.
Okay, just like one more time. We know that it's hippocampus, not amygdala. At the bottom of your mouth, like your shape, so there's like a white curl.
I can see like a white line going through right here. Like if you're looking at amygdala, it's just straight gray matter there.
There's a question.
Yes.
But that looks like a teardrop.
It does, but if you look, I don't know how great this camera is, but there is a white line that's going through right here. If you can see any lines going through it, so when we are at amygdala, which one was definitely amygdala? This guy. This is more, I don't really see any like curves going in right there. It's not the best section. But I would try to not make it confusing when we're looking at it. So I might not choose something like this. I might choose something you can definitely see hippocampus at the top and bottom. This side right here is more like amygdala here, where you can see it's got this smooth shape to it. It doesn't have any white lines going through it or curling around in there. So that side is more amygdala. This is more hippocampus over here.
So are we going to be tested on the
Pulvinar? No. It's impossible to ask a pulvinar question without giving away the answer, basically. So we're not going to use that. We're not going to do that one. Other questions? Do you have a question? Okay. Dominic, do you have a question?
How would you ask about
Fimbria? Be like name these fibers, and it would probably be something where we can more clearly, like this kind of cut right here. Or we do something more like this cut where you can see these fibers right here. These fibers that are connecting this top part of the hippocampus and the bottom part, that's the fimbria right there.
Yes, right below the lateral ventricle.
This nucleus up here, does anyone know what this is? Caudate. That's still the caudate. That's crazy.
It just keeps moving up pretty much.
Yeah, it just pretty much stays. So if you see a pin that's on the lateral side of the lateral ventricle and it's gray matter, that'll be caudate. It has this long tail. It just keeps going back for days.
It took me a while.
Just days and days.
But you know that thin line from top to bottom? Yeah, right.
So here on this cut, we're starting to see some of the LGN right here where it's darker right there. But this is more like LGN where you can see on this one, you got this big old bump on the side right there. This is also LGN on this side of the fimbria here. So that's the lateral geniculate. That's where the fibers are synapsing that are coming from the optic tract. So they're all synapsing onto these guys right here. The LGN would just be something like name the specific nucleus the pin is going through.
And is it okay to just the LGN?
You can just put the letters LGN. It is the synapsing points. The axons leaving your eye from the neurons in your eyeball keep traveling back. They go through the optic nerve, past the optic chiasm. We're still the same axon. Keep going. How far back do they go? They keep going until they get to the LGN. And it's at that point that they first synapse, the axons coming from your eye. They synapse onto cells in the LGN. Remember, the thalamus is the relay center for all the sensory systems in the brain, except for smell. But that's where the visual system has its relay center, is in the LGN, and then neurons from the LGN will send that information back to the primary visual cortex.
Oh, so that's the structure inside of the thalamus?
It's part of the thalamus. So the thalamus has separate nuclei for each of the different sensory systems, and the LGN is the nucleus within the thalamus for the visual system. Question?
If you can't see the LG anywhere else other than this kind of cut.
Yeah, so it's going to be at the very back end of the thalamus. It's on the lateral side, and it's towards the very back of the thalamus. It is this bump right here on the side. It's also this kind of wide half moon shape right here. So it starts out as kind of this large lump that becomes kind of a bump towards the back lateral side of it.
How would we best identify that?
Anytime that, so you know you're at the thalamus right here, right? This is definitely the thalamus. We're not looking at the caudate, right? And there's a pin over here to the lateral side of it. There's only one thing that we've asked for that's on like the lateral side, where you can see the hippocampus up here. Like you'll definitely be able to see hippocampus either going all the way along. You'll see hippocampus with fimbria. That's how you know you're at the distance back where the LGN would be. Yes.
Can you not see the habenula yet?
You can see the habenula. So it is this little bump on the inside right here. So the habenula, if we ask that question, it would be a bump that you can clearly see towards the inside. You can also see it on this one. This might be a little more clear. So this bump right here on the inside portion, I'm going to accidentally tear it off by trying to point it out. That is the habenula right there. So if there's a pin towards the medial portion of the thalamus, and we're asking to name the specific nucleus, that's the habenula. And on this one here, we can see, so if we pull the hippocampus back, we can see here are the optic fibers running along right here. There's white along there. And this is the fimbria right here. So it'd be kind of fun to stick a pin right between the two and be like, name the fibers just medial to this pin and name the fibers just lateral to this pin. There would be optic fibers on one side and fimbria on the other side.
Can you see the lateral?
Yeah, so the lateral geniculate is this large half moon. You can see these are the optic fibers here, and that's where they're going to be synapsing, is on this thing. So it starts out kind of as this wide bump that becomes kind of a narrower bump towards the back. But if we're asking anything where it's like name the specific nucleus on the lateral side, it's probably the lateral geniculate that we're asking about. Respect there. Yeah, so you won't see fimbria unless you can see hippocampus at the same time, where you see it on the top and the bottom, because the fimbria is like the webbing of my hand right here that's connecting that top and bottom part of the hippocampus. It's like the white matter that's connecting those top and bottom parts so they can speak to each other a little bit more easily.
It's might have been kind of far back and we need to go back to it. But
I don't think we're going to worry about those ones. Just take it off the list.
Are we going to be able to see the structure that connects the thalamus?
You can definitely see it. I'm not going to be able to really point it out. I mean, like it should be there at this point. It's kind of this bottom. There should be a portion that's right here that's going through the middle. When we're doing these coronal cuts, a lot of times it'll tear pretty easily. But if you can see that there's third ventricle towards the top, there's third ventricle towards the bottom, there's not really any ventricle in the center, that's when you're at the mass intermedia, which you can see a little more clearly on a coronal cut that it's definitely connecting both sides. So we could definitely ask the mass intermedia on a coronal cut where there's a pin that's just like right in the center. You'll be able to see third ventricle above and third ventricle below. And it'd be like, name these fibers, name the structure that's interrupting the third ventricle. Any other questions? Yes.
Can you say, disregard the third ventricle?
Yeah, don't worry. I don't think we're going to ask that one on the practicum. Anything else?
Okay, I have a question. So you can start seeing the thalamus when you can see the
So the fornix starts showing up around the very beginning of the thalamus. But yeah, when you can see the third ventricle also. So like this guy right here, I can see fornix here. I can also see third ventricle because it's kind of that fornix that's creating the third ventricle by going up around the front part of the thalamus.
Okay.
It's creating that separation between the lateral ventricle above it and the space then below it, which is the third ventricle.
And so the thalamus would just be below the third ventricle, that area.
The third ventricle kind of goes around the thalamus. So it's kind of in that, so it's that narrow space that's between where it has a top portion and a bottom portion. It's kind of just a narrow space right there. Okay. So we are almost to the back of the brain. So if you can see this bump that's just right here in the center here, that guy, what is that? Pineal gland. What is this guy right here? Hippocampus, right. And this is kind of still the, I guess it feels like it's more like, no, maybe we've moved on to the, so if you can see a hole right here, cerebral aqueduct, and in fact, maybe I'll use another, we'll do this one for this very end portion. All right, so what is this nucleus right here at the top? Superior colliculus, and this little hole right here. And so then everything that is the cerebral aqueduct, everything that is above that hole is considered the, and everything that's below the hole, correct. And so therefore these guys that are the bumps here at the bottom, correct, those are the cerebral peduncles. I think that's everything off of our coronal structures list. Does anyone have any other questions?
Where would the anterior commissure?
Anterior commissure, sometimes you can see it in the coronals as being a streak across the cut. I don't see it in any of these. But it'd be like a white line that's going kind of across about the level of the globus pallidus.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yes.
Just said it. The little lines that are white matter is the fornix. When it's gray, what is it again?
The hippocampus. So, not that guy. So when it goes to like being like that, this is now hippocampus up here. Versus when it looks like this, that's more like fornix. When it's white like that, it becomes hippocampus when it looks more like gray matter up there. Yeah, and it's also on the bottom here because it's kind of shaped like this, where you got a top part and a bottom part. Question? Yeah, only on full coronal cuts for the exam.